Yeah. So, yeah, 1973, and a remarkably good book. One chapter is called With Freud Against Vulgar Marxism, with Marx against vulgar Freudianism, and a kind of synthesis. It's an attempted Marxist synthesis. Maybe we'll get some sections, but that's one fundamental text that comes out that is very strong in terms of its understanding of Freud as the project for scientific psychology. So anyway, I'm sorry, these are the ideas that are kind of coming to my mind here, and Josh and a few other people have encouraged a redoing of this. I did this for a 2-week intensive for the Marxist educational project about 5 or 6 years ago, before COVID, a couple of years before COVID. Very, very successful in May and June of, I think, 2017. And it's something that I really enjoy and try to learn from. So we could go over a lot of the things we've done before, right? And bring it around. I mean, of course, I would mention Dasein analysis, which Heidegger had his after the war, when during the denazification, he was analyzed by Medard Boss, was the name of the person. Um, 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 and Dasein now. They had sessions on the ski slopes, which was interesting. Yeah, for Heidegger. Anyway, so design analysis had a lot going on for it. Ludwig Binswanger has been fit into that moment, and their new workout, and maybe it'll be out by that time, by Michel Foucault on Binswanger early on in Foucault's career. His writings on quote unquote mental illness, or abnormality, if you will. So I look forward to something like this. It's very grounded in where we are today. Given, I don't know if we have a category for the lunacy, and I mean, we have general terms, but for the lunacy that's running the world. But on the other hand, I think maybe it will give us some insight too, and into our own lives, and what the role, if there is still a role, for psychoanalysis, existential psychoanalysis, Lacanian short sessions, whatever, going forward. How do we, take this up in terms of our own everyday lives and in our teaching practices and other practices? So that would be sort of the idea. Start that sometime February or March. And we would be giving a talk on this. And I had the idea for the Marxist summer school that we should devote a week to psychoanalysis on the left. So this fits into the program next year. And I'm going to get them to record my sessions and the interactions, at least, on this. I think it'd be very important to do so. And of course, everybody's invited. Uh, you know, um, um, if you want to take the time and get some Greek sun, right? Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I could begin just a little bit. Eva Kittay is known within the ethics of care movement as a philosopher, one of the best ones. She follows in a tradition, if you'd like to know, Carol Gilligan, that probably some of you know, Carol Gilligan, of course, Sara Ruddick, and Nel Noddings, right? These are the major figures in, quote, care ethics, if you will, early on. And um, her book, The Ethics of Care, Dependency and Disability, was a follow-up on what we're reading from, which is her early work called Love's Labor, in which she develops her paradigms, if you will, on disability studies, as well as confronting disabilities in one's own household. And in this section, the reason I chose it, it has a paradigm of dependency work, and how she operates. There seem to be, at least from my research and what I've learned from Kittay by reading parts of articles, mostly by her. I've never read a full book. Is that she has or that the movement has four basic categories, always looking. One is out of Heidegger, attunement and attention, which fits very much with, of course, the Heideggerian moment, right? The other one, of course, is the responsibility, how one takes responsibility to giving care, right? And then another one, of course, would be on another level, the functional thing of competence, right? That how does one provide the actual care? How does one really give care? And then the responsiveness, right? What is the recipient's uh, reaction or response to the care? How does that work in a dialectical way? So it seems to me that these categories run throughout her work and other people's work as well, Gilligan in particular too, although I think Kittay expands it. I think her main antagonism, those that you follow liberal theories of politics, John Rawls, which was all the rage, from Harvard to I guess Stanford for a while, theory of justice and political liberalism, was read by many political theorists. I think she's arguing for this to be this ethics of care and the engagement with those with disabilities to be included in a theories of justice. That Rawls's own um, if you will, Rawls's, premises were built on self-sufficient, independent, enlightened beings, right? The theory of justice. And he left out people who were in need of care or disabled, etc., right? How this works. Those of you that know our friend Arto, he did some good work in an article he published in Situations about one of the clinics in Russia. I can refer and maybe even send that article. The last page is very good. Let me see if I can find it, and I'll tell you the exact. I always forget the actual site, but I may have the. Let me just see. Yeah, I think I have it here. Who knows? Yeah, just give me 1 second. I think I brought it back from. I think I had a copy. Montreal that I brought back. I may not have it. I may have left it. No. Yeah, yeah, I think it's here. Yep. Yes, it's a piece that Arto wrote. Um, Communist Eudaimonia, Communist Well-Being. And this was years ago, about 3, 4 years ago, that he wrote this, and it was published in 2022. I just wanted to read you the last section because this could be a model on which we can go on. And yeah, the epilogue, this is in the article at the last page. The section is called the Epilogue Zagorsk, 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 right? He says the experimental educational program that was undertaken at the Zagorsk home for mute, deaf, and blind children in the 1970s in the Soviet Union, a program in which Alenkov, the philosopher, do you all know Evaldo Alenkov, one of the great Soviet philosophers, wrote a book called Dialectical Logic. He wrote many, many, many good books, but Dialectical Logic, certainly worth reading. One of the more radical thinkers of his time. And of course, he ended up on the list in the 70s and went through a lot of depressions and ended up, I guess, committing suicide. But yeah, anyway, doesn't take away from the thinking. Okay, so he makes a special place, right? It's an actual example of thinking activity motivated by communist politics in the full sense that is articulated by Lenyov. And, Arto is citing Lenyov throughout this article. I'll see if I can get this downloaded and send it to the group too. I think I can. I should be able to. I don't think this issue of Situations is up on the website yet. I'll have to talk to Josh about that. But anyway, it's a radical political act, the experiment at Zagorsk, a communist deconstruction of liberal approaches to human subjectivity with its endless meditations on natures versus nurture. This is the bourgeois, endless meditations on nature and nurture, right? Which one is, Phil knows Arto well. Which one is it? Nurture, the formation of all the core aspects of what makes us human, is activated only in the context of particular social relations. Ilenkov watches this process from up close as Zagor's, witnessing as if in a slow motion film, he writes, the key stages in the formation of human personality, consciousness, self-consciousness, will, emotional building, and moral principles, as they merge through the applications of a conscious, directed, and based on a Marxist conception of human being educational curriculum. Okay, it's interesting how the curriculum is used at this school, this experimental school, for the deaf, the blind, and the mute. Right? Very interesting. Right? As such, the courses is also an affirmation, a prototype element of what communist subjectivity could be, a harbinger of communist eudaimonia, which centers enormous efforts and will to power on the importance of ensuring the development of a common to all universal abilities in every member of society. Communist living as a condition of everyday life where every human being can become a full member of society, no matter what no matter what the initial starting conditions of this entry into life is. Sikoris is an example of communism in embryo, showing beyond any doubt that the full development of a human being is an actual condition that can be realized. This is how Sororov, one of the graduates of the school and a close student in front of Yenkov, described his teacher's struggle. You dedicated your entire life against the position of viewing talent as a privilege. You waged a scientifically, justified protest against the view that the condition of the majority of the human masses is the condition of drabness, anonymity, and mediocrity. Drabness, grayness, is not normal. Normal is only taken. Therefore, anyone can and must be talented. Poverty and indigence are not only material conditions, lack of money, or the absence of property. Philosophers and poets long ago discovered the most terrifying poverty is the poverty of the spirit of soullessness. I always like this. This is really, Marx, the poverty of philosophy, didn't do us a favor, even though he was referring to Proudhon, right? And, the philosophy of poverty was Proudhon's title, and this Marx inverted that to criticize Proudhon early on in what was called the poverty of philosophy. Okay, in this sense, you were not the first, nor will you be the last, in your tortured reflections about the conditions under which the drab dweller, the empty stomach that wants for some nourishment, had to become a person, a spiritual, talented human being. What is necessary for everyone to be able to dream and to incorporate that dream in reality? So I think this is very important. This was a very successful clinic in terms of its curriculum, built towards building a true, a moment towards communist well-being, right? And this was a very successful place. I'm sure we can speak to some successful places. One of the reasons I'm very interested in anti-psychiatry. Once the walls would come down, there were some successes in that movement. There were some successes in the so-called, psychiatric hospitals in terms of open door policies in the 60s and 70s. And I think Kittay, I don't know how much she's aware of the Soviet experiments, but she's coming out of this in some ways with disabilities, right? That these are human beings. We have to begin first and foremost that way, first and foremost with the Heideggerian notion of Bestimmung, attunement, if you will, determination, giving attention to responsibility, functional competence ultimately on that level, and then responsiveness. So I'm gonna go just quickly, and I'd like to hear from you what you gathered. Did you have time to read it? I sent it out, unlike Michael Pelias, 8 days in advance, so you'd have a chance, the whole book, to do it with some pages. But anyway, I'm sorry to, yeah. Anyway, I want to just maybe just go to a couple of key passages, and then we can talk about this at length. etc. I mean, this is very, very interesting. Yeah, yeah, but anyway, I mean, she goes through equality, right, very early on. And remember, this is dated. This is 1999. She's using things like, Anita Hill, where we should have known much more about Joe Biden than before we elected him president, but about who he really was. I mean, we knew the credit card scam, but he also played the worst kind of games with the system, et cetera. Yeah. Right. I just want to go to a couple of things here. Um, I like this quote. This is on page 27. I printed it up. I don't have the book. Dorothy Parker is said to have commented, "The trouble with having children that is once you have them." I don't know. Right, Beryl, right, Caroline,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
grandmothers probably too. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, very interesting, Dorothy Parker and her circle, by the way, who was one of her other great sayings was, if voting was so dangerous, they never would have given it to you.
Yeah,
She was a character at the Algonquin
it's
Hotel,
great.
right? Yeah, yeah. She was very smart, the Dorothy Parker. But anyway, she said, so let me just back here. Here, dependency in the human condition, but I wanted to go the paradigm of dependency work first, and then we can go backwards. This is on page 31. In order to understand its pragmatic requirements and moral demands, we need to consider dependency work in the paradigm case of a dependency relationship. So you have to first of all begin to look at dependency from the standpoint of a depend. I don't like the term codependency at all, and I think she's taking this as well too. I like interdependency. It's
Mm.
much better moment in all of this, right? So such a paradigm, right, will capture its salient features when the work is well done and the relationship is a satisfying one. The labor when well done, again, this is dependency work, care work as well, right? Right? Is characterized by, excuse me, I think it's Jane Martin's three C's: care,
Oh,
concern, and connection. Okay, you know it, Caroline. You know this.
yeah.
You know her
Jane
work.
Martin, yeah.
Please inform me because I'm a novice to this. I thought it would fit, but please go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Well, she wrote a book called "The Education of what the ideal education for women." I forget the title,
Okay,
um, but yeah, a very thoughtful philosopher in education.
okay. It is the work of tending to others in their state of vulnerability, care in the state of vulnerability. Number one, the labor either sustains ties among intimates or itself creates intimacy and trust, that is connection, right? So I think this is very important. This is something we've really forgotten many, many ways. The labor either sustains ties among initiates or itself creates intimacy and trust connection and affectional ties, that is concern, right? Generally sustain the connection even when the work involves an economic exchange. For the dependency worker, the well-being and thriving of the change is the primary focus of the work. In short, the well-being of the charge is the responsibility, right, of the dependency worker. Such is the paradigmatic or paradigm case, she says, of dependency work. With respect to this paradigm, a few clarifications are in order. First, to define dependency work, as I've done, appears to preclude reciprocal care. Right? In the paradigm case, there are those who cared for are unable to care for themselves. Right? And so one assumes they are incapable of caring for another while in this state, which is interesting, right? But interdependencies of caring relations are not only possible, they are common. Care may be reciprocated simultaneously. This can occur if neither party is too incapacitated, excuse me, or if one is in incapacity to in a way that the other party is not, or in cases where reciprocity can take place over time. A reciprocal arrangement wherein there is an alteration of rules between the one who does the caring and the one who's cared for is just a modification of the care case. I think this is really worth thinking about how this works in everyday life, in terms of building a kind of ethic, if you will, of care. And by the way, everybody knows that Foucault, later in life when he got tired of history of sexuality, said it bored him when by the time. The second volume is the ethics of the care for self, right? And he was very interested, if you will, in developing an ethics of care, in the late 70s and especially in the early 80s before his death. The volumes, right? The History of Sexuality, Volume 1. The second volume, of course, was on care, right? Care, right? And yeah, it continued the care for the self, right? Was there too. All right. So anyway, secondly, I spoke if the responsibility for dependency work always falls upon a single individual. This reflects the prevalence of such forms of caregiving within our own society. And it kind of reinforces I'm the caretaker, right? And this takes away from what she's really trying to do here, right? Or rather, tasks that are best described as dependency works take the form in which one person is expected to execute all its different aspects. Where the work has become rationalized and professionalized, it tends to be less recognizable as work. So I have many friends whose parents now are in care, right? I mean, especially in Montreal. All they do is complain about the so-called people that come to the house, right? The state, the people above them, et cetera, et cetera. I think she's, leveling against this professionalization and, of course, the bureaucratization of care. So nursing, traditionally, right, done at home as unpaid familial women's work, this is another interesting part she has not only moved out of the home, but has splintered into a variety of forms and functions. Some nursing work, but not all, continues to be dependency work in any primary sense. While there is no inherent reason why dependency work cannot be shared, and I can't, oh yeah, at any even time, it may be necessary that responsibility is assigned, not to one individual, but then to a few. Otherwise, there is the danger that at any particular moment, each caregiver supposes that another is looking out for the dependent when in fact, no one is paying attention. And this is the complaints you get in a lot of caretaking situations. I think very, very, very good the way she articulates this. Okay, so nonetheless, considerations bearing on the just distribution of dependency work, which are central to the project at hand, must assume that it is possible to divide some of the responsibilities. At times, bearing the full brunt of caring for another can be too burdensome, and only by sharing responsibility can the work itself be made non-exploitative. Right? Interesting, right? Finally, to speak of a dependency worker may suggest that dependency work is to be so distributed that it becomes the life work of certain people, classes, or gender, thereby presenting a distinctive class of workers. This is, in fact, the current shape of things. But to define such a species of work, and this is interesting to me, and such a species of worker should not foreclose distributional questions, right? As I hope to make clear in subsequent arguments, it is precisely the current distribution of dependency work that requires revision. So it's going to take on this industry, if you will. We can call, I guess, generically the care industry. While dependency work can be variously distributed and shared as long as an individual is responsible for the care of another who is dependent on her, I call that person a dependency worker, right? So she's beginning to make her definitions, right? Etc. So this is the paradigm in which she's going to be operating. I mean, any thoughts about this? Again, I find this it's kind of good for me to think in this context because I think too much in levels of uh, abstractions, etc., and to bring this down back to a more tangible, concrete, everyday sense is very interesting to me. You know, um, I mean, I've been around people who are very needy, to put it mildly. I don't know what that really means when I use the word, but have emotional needs go beyond the norm, beyond the, expected, right? Or what could be considered rational or even quasi-rational at times, right? In a sense. And I'm always interested, how does one reach out to them? As a teacher, Caroline Barrow would certainly know this, and of course, Patrick and David and Leslie, I'm sure you've been in positions, so all of us, in a way, as a teacher, we always think about the students too. Where's the level of the attentiveness? Where's the care, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, yeah. How do we really convey, something about that? There's more at stake here than your grade or just receiving information, right? In a sense. So I think this is a very interesting project that opens up under if you will, the general category of the ethics of care, right? Which I think Stiegler fits into on a maybe higher. I mean, we can talk about this later in terms of a higher theoretical plane because he's asking the question, what is called caring, right? Still. Yeah, but please, anybody, some thoughts? Caroline, I'm really glad. I mean, I've never read June, what is her name? Uh,
Jane Rowland Martin.
Martin, yes, work. I'm going to take a look though. Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's funny because it was the first publication I had, so that was a long time ago.
Oh, okay, good. All right.
Writing about her using
No.
her book, and of course, I taught at the University of Illinois, and at a conference where I presented the paper before it was published with two of my colleagues, um, another scholar named the three of us, me and my two colleagues, the three C's. So when you were talking, it was like going down.
Oh, okay. Memory lane, huh? Yeah, yeah. Return
but
of the repressed, huh?
but but there's several things. I've had several thoughts
Please,
about
please.
the one. I'm not a fan of Noddings, but that's another story. But what I'll say
Okay.
is she wrote a horrifically damaging letter for a colleague of mine when I was a department chair at Northern Arizona University. And the letter was so awful that I hope no one will ever say this to anyone, but I ripped it up. The person was going up for tenure, and I was like, no way am I putting this letter in this person's tenure file. It was just, and I thought, how how interesting, right? We can write about things, but how about if we actually learn how to be those things? Um,
Well,
but
that's a great thing. I mean, that's a great moment. Yeah, it's in all of this. Yeah.
but
Here comes Jeremy. He tries to be both. I know Jeremy a long time. So good. Okay, Jeremy, we're just talking about you positively. Yeah, go ahead, please, Caroline. I'm
Well,
sorry.
what I was going to say is there's an example for me that happened many years ago. I don't know when was it. It was probably in the early 70s. I was directing an Upward Bound program with predominantly Hopi and Navajo students. And one of the students, Edmund Austin, was the president of our student government. And we were in a small community in southern Utah, so very conservative. And of course, the stereotype of the drunken Indian was, alive and well at that time. And so we had rules about, it was a summer program. Students were living on a college campus, and students would go out. And I had to be very attentive because it in that conservative community, I didn't want anything to happen that would jeopardize the program, right? And so the students would break the rules, and then the rules were that they would be sent home. Well, Edmund came to me because part of my philosophy in the program was that students should learn to negotiate, for what they wanted from the university, because the university was not designed for their cultural background. So Edmund comes up to me and he says, um, they called me CJ, and he said, CJ, I want to negotiate. I knew I was in trouble, right? So he says, I noticed that the students go out and they get in trouble and they're drinking or they're, violating the rules. And then we send them home. And that doesn't really work for the purpose of the program. I want to make another proposal that we take responsibility for each other. And when we see someone's about to break the rules, we go have a conversation with them and say, please don't do that. I want you to stay here because I want you to get the benefit of this program. Well, that led to, so Edmund was like, could we try this out? Right. And we're supposed to be getting on a bus to go up in the mountains for a weekend, camping trip. And so I gather all the students and the staff that are working in the program, and we sit on the lawn and I say, okay, we got to talk about this proposal, right? And we, kind of went around a circle several times, and people had all the usual arguments you would expect, right? Like, oh no, they knew the rules and they chose to break them, so they should be sent home, right? And I could see the staff kind of freaking out in the background, like, why the hell are we letting the students have this conversation, right? And anyway, as we went around and around and around, the students finally decided that they wanted to try Edmund's idea, that it had value. And so that night, some students, we were having a dance, and some students went off to get into some mischief. And one of the students came to me and said, what do we do? And I said, it's not what do we do, it's what are you going to do, right? So they went out and talked to the students, and apparently the students decided that they wanted to get into mischief more than they wanted to stay in the program. Well, what the reason I tell the story is what was so amazing to me was, one, that the students did not were fine with those students going home. They accepted that they wanted to be committed to what you're calling an ethic of care, right? And they
Yeah.
wanted to take responsibility for the community, but they could also appreciate that people make choices and they chose, right? So the students didn't ever come back to me and say, oh no, we have to give them another chance. Instead, what happened was the climate of the program shifted dramatically because the students took on the power of, you know, being responsible for each other. And so when I was working on my dissertation, I shared this story with a group of people that were working in similar programs, and almost to the person, all of them said, oh no, the students who break the rules should be sent home. I was devastated. Right? Like, how could you possibly think that, right? And not get what's going on here, right?
Right.
But I
But
thought it was amazing, a high school student, right? But
yeah,
of course, coming from an indigenous background with very different ways of thinking and being, would have that foresight to say we could make a difference with somebody if we're committed to speaking up and telling them we care.
as the little big man said in the famous movie of the early 70s, my heart soars like a hawk. Right. Were together, right? Which was a very beautiful saying. What to me, Dustin Hoffman's by far his best role, but I'm very prejudiced on that movie. Talking to grandfather, yeah. I mean, a very good approach. One of the few times Hollywood really captured a spirit of the what it meant to be out there. Of course, they didn't get an American Indian actor to play the role,
Yeah.
but yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so anyway, very good. Thank you for that. I just want to move on with a couple of the things that she brings up. She also speaks again of Ruddick, right? Maternal practice on the next page, right? As a paradigm too, as a practice, how dependency work becomes a practice. So she uses Sara Ruddick on page 33, Maternal practice provides a paradigmatic instance of dependency work. So maternal practice. What is it? Three features, right, that she has. Preservative love, fostering growth, and I'm not crazy about the next one, training for social acceptance. But anyway, that's me. I'm with the indigenous on this one. What rules, Anyway, or it's yeah. Anyway, so engagement in each aspect of maternal practice is dependency work, right? Nevertheless, not only all dependency work is characterized by this same practice. Considering caring, and she gives good examples here for the frail elderly. A preservative concern and respect may be more to the point than a preservative love, right? Right? So this is interesting, right? And in certain cultural circumstances, deference may be the preferred affect accompanying preservative behaviors, right? Yeah, in a sense, right? Care for the elderly requires fostering self-sufficiency and self-esteem, which I think is very good, rather than fostering growth, right? Rather than socializing for acceptance, care for the elderly requires stemming a disintegration of that social acceptability and sense of social self-esteem which the individual attained while a vigorous adult. It's kind of interesting, right? You must have been something back in your day. In a sense, this is really a slogan that comes around to haunt us that are on quote Social Security, if you will, or Medicare age, right, et cetera, right? The practice of caring for the severely developmentally disabled provides yet another paradigm. So we have the maternal love, right, of dependence work, distinguishable from the model of maternal care necessary for the intact, flourishing child. So she takes Ruddick another step forward, which I really like, right? In chapter 7, I'll discuss in detail such differences in maternal practice. For now, consider in the case of the significantly disabled child, right? That preservative love and concern may have to be accompanied by a lifelong commitment to day-to-day physical care for the charge, right? Fostering development also becomes a lifelong project, but the notion of development begins to attain a new sense. Socialization for acceptance may involve less effort directed towards the training of the charge and more to the changing the expectations and the grounds of acceptance of society itself, right? Different practices then differentially shape demands on the dependency worker. So I like the way she plays off both the dependency worker and the multiple paradigms that are being proposed here from, the maternal, but then the severely developmentally disabled, right, et cetera. This is very interesting, and how one might treat people aging, the so-called problem, of aging, and how that's very different than just maternal practice. So I think this is a very interesting situating dependency work as a practice. Okay, so maybe I'll stop here for a minute. I mean, any thoughts or remarks about this? Again, it's not a really complicated. She's really trying to develop her own theory again of what love labor really means. She's trying to bring into this the question of the disabled. One of the reasons I read Arto's last section of Communist Eudaimonia. I'll find it and send it to you. I think it's an interesting piece. I personally worked on it, as did Jeremy. Jeremy did a good editing job on it this year. And and I think the last section is very interesting on this, how the school, this curriculum, right, actually helped, right, developed and really educated people how this can be done in our societies as we face these enormous cutbacks in care, right? Huge. you know, and especially in the United States. I don't know about Australia or Canada. I mean, I find the Canadian health system, Leslie, with all due respect, in Quebec to be a nightmare. Getting an appointment, getting to the right specialist, getting people on the phone just to cancel an appointment, just from work with friends. Yeah, yeah,
Well, it's
please.
also a growing concern as
Yes.
well as we age, as the population is healthier physically.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned, that joke about the disabled community calls those who are not part of the community temporarily able-bodied.
Oh, that's
And
well, I like that. Yeah.
yeah, because we're all going to need help. We need
Right.
help right now. But I was just at a Christmas concert for my granddaughter, and there are a lot of special needs children in that school.
Okay.
And still, it felt they're participating with the others, so it feels like it's inclusive, but it isn't. I got this sense that they're over on the side so they can be watched, and immediately, something happens, whatever. I'm not sure that we're really there, but I saw one example, and I did mention this to Bruno in, I think it's called the Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver,
Uh-huh.
where there is, she's a wonderful writer, where there is our hero who's led a horrible life, connects with this other young man who's in a wheelchair and has difficulty communicating. But there is just this incredible moment where the so-called severely disabled individual communicates with the world and provides something so beautiful for
Hmm.
others. And it just so heartwarming. And the way that she was able to work that really impressed me. I used to work for the Vancouver School Board and did lots of articles on inclusivity, and my mother was a special needs assistant as well. And um, attempts are made, but there's something awkward about it. So I'm really interested in hearing about this Soviet model and seeing where, what's the missing piece here. It just looks like it's an add-on, there's
Maybe
something.
curriculum.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so
I mean, I'm sorry to be such a pedagogue here, but who knows, I mean, I'm teaching a course on superheroes in the comics next semester. I'm doing a special seminar with honor students. And, of course, I have to go through the myth of Superman, two Jewish teenagers
yeah,
sitting around. What is this Superman, right? Maybe we should create one here. Superman was, basically like a garage creation by
Mm,
two Jewish kids, right?
yeah,
16 years old, that they developed this. So in a lot of ways, and at the same time, I've got a book on indigenous comics that never go out, as oppositionally to the superhero. I begin
yes,
to try to think this as much as I can, dialectically. So, but again, curriculum is very important. You have to
mm,
find, again, the way in, and this is what we're so lacking because we're so bureaucratized, so
yeah,
trained. That's why I don't like this thing about rules and training or social acceptance that's being used here by, I think it was Ruddick used the term, the training for social acceptance, whatever that means.
mm,
I mean, maybe training for social acceptance is you try to eliminate prejudices about the disabled or those that are, quote, challenged or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, this is, I think, again, very important, what you bring up, you know, because, yeah. And, remember, Vancouver's the home to Gabor Mate. It's not like it's a
mm,
reactive, regressive area, right? In a sense, there are some very interesting experiments. And I love his work, personally, to me. I love his approach to people. I don't know if any of you seen the YouTube conversations with him when he's confronted by Zionists, but he's really great with this. I mean, he really knows how to handle this in a beautiful way. He's very, very intelligent, in the way he handles stuff. So anyway,
yeah.
all to say, I mean, this takes, in some ways, and I've always been interested in this, abstraction and empathy, which was a 19th century book on the world of art, right? And, and et cetera. And I'm very interested in these kind of things. What does the empathic really mean, right? At this point, because we have everybody, oh, that's so terrible. That's so tragic. Oh, wow, et cetera, et cetera. But there's nothing of depth that's going on
Mm,
there in a sense that this does not translate into our culture. And then how it's used, this whole thing with the Charlie Kirk, how it's used politically. We can see how it feeds in David's course, the micro-fascism of the day,
mm,
this kind of phony empathy, and we
mm,
feel for this, and then how it empowers in a very different way. So I think one of the reasons Arto put it there is that in a way that the communist eudaimonia literally is something about the possibility that all humans have. And that's really
mm,
been forgotten, right? Since the course was originally called possibility being higher than actuality or whatever, we can talk about if that's a misnomer or not. But yeah, so yeah, so I'm with you on this too. I think it's very good when Kittay speaks about the bureaucratization of the care industry, and the more in
mm,
the room, the worse it is on caretaking. Yeah, I have a friend that's going through hell with a caretaker for his girlfriend's mother, who's 90 something years old, round the clock care, and how they come in and then they're monitored in terms of the sheets, etc. That's the last thing, right, that this poor woman needs. He sits with her and laughs with her, right?
mm.
She gets more out of him, who's a complete non-professional, right? Not trained at all, but just a human being who kind of understands intuitively what's going on. So yeah, again, yeah,
But maybe needs both.
yeah. Let's do the same. Yeah, Phil. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, years ago, I worked in a junior high school in San Francisco with special needs kids, and the we well, these kids were mostly autistic and fairly. Some of them were nonverbal, some of them were just, were wild. Um, but we we got this kid who showed up one day, and they put him in our class, and he was a Hmong kid um, from Laos, and we and he came in, and he's kind of a big stocky kid, and we're like, huh. He didn't have any English at all, and he was supposed to be in newcomer high school, but the teachers at newcomer decided they didn't want to deal with him, and so they just sent him to us. And I mean, he was rough. He was culturally unaccustomed to, like his favorite thing for me was, I'd see him in the morning and he'd throw me into a headlock, you know. Um,
Good to see you, boss. Yeah,
yeah. I
that's
was
right.
like,
Yeah, yeah.
Von Chan, can you let me go? You know?
I guess you all remember the great scene in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when all the inmates are on the boat when they're taken out with the two girlfriends of Jack Nicholson. They go out in the boat. You remember this? He
Yeah, yeah.
escapes from the asylum for a day, and then they come back into the harbor, and everybody says, "Meet Dr. Federer." Meet Dr. So and so, meet Dr. So, and they all took on the parts perfectly.
Mm.
Right? It was
Yeah.
great. You couldn't have said it. You'd think you were in the presence of Otto Rank, Carl Abraham,
Yeah. Well, this
etc.
this kid this kid
Yeah.
became like another teacher because
Right, right,
he was not autistic. He
right,
had no disabilities whatsoever, except he didn't speak English,
Mm.
and
right,
culturally he was
right,
different. I mean, he came from a different.
right. Uh,
So and, he, like, we had kids that would run, and he was fast, and he would catch them.
was the main man, huh?
He
Yeah.
was.
Did you get him a nickname? Did you give him a nickname?
No, I mean, you know, he's
That's
Longchamp.
one way of getting, some kind of affection. I mean, I'm not, saying he needed a
Yeah.
nickname, but
No,
sometimes.
he had refused to learn English, and so
Oh,
so
I
I
see.
started learning Hmong, you know, and he taught me Hmong, and I taught him English, you know,
Oh, yeah,
and you know,
right.
it worked. And
Yeah, great.
I saw him years later, you know, walking down the street, and I was like, Longchamp, how you doing? He's like, I'm doing pretty good, you know. And I said, what are you up to? And, yeah, he was working as a mechanic in the
And
garage down
he
the
took a
street.
hold on you?
No, no.
Oh, you know, okay. I was just wondering.
He'd grown, this was a few years later. He'd grown up by that point.
Right. He grown up. Well, maybe. I mean, maybe he could play out the role still. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But the thing is, you know, he became another teacher, actually, you
Mhm.
know.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So, I mean, I kind of like the three C's. I would certainly add to it, compassion,
Mhm.
right? In a sense that you always need that. Let's make it four C's. We could add some other ones, but I think this is again important in the dependency paradigm going forward. So, yeah. Anybody else, David? Any thoughts tonight about how this is unfolding? It's like I said, it's not an overly theoretical piece. She's trying to really build an argument, in my opinion, at least professionally, against John Rawls' theory of justice that leads the disabled, right? She's really trying to make a case for the disabled and for quote unquote, interdependency against his self-sufficiency in terms of a theory of justice, right? So there is here. Beryl, yeah, please, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'm just thinking that
yeah,
one thing that's left out here, and
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
thinking
sure,
this because of a reflection that it's prompted on my own family experience,
right,
is the word obligation.
right,
One of the things that I realize is that my family of origin kind of played out a particular sort of trajectory of modernity in that my mother took it as given that when her parents became infirm,
right.
they would be brought to live with us, which
Mine too.
they did when I was 8 years old.
Yeah,
And she looked after them for, and my grandfather died when I was 16.
right,
And possibly, when my grandmother could no longer get out of bed, she was briefly put into care before she died. But one of the things that my mother insisted on when she was old, and she actually lived to nearly 104, God help her,
wow.
um,
You have
was that,
23 years to go on genetic.
yeah, right. And
Or
she,
24, yeah.
yeah, she absolutely was adamant that there is no way that she would impose herself on any of her children.
Right, right.
And it was that idea that and she was not a feminist, by the way. I was thinking of her yesterday in relation to your comment that women can be misogynist. She was
Oh,
she was
yesterday. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right.
she
Yeah.
it
My mother
wasn't,
too, in some ways. Same.
yeah. But
Right,
it's that idea that somehow it was more modern to be
right.
looked after in by professionals.
Mhm.
And of course now in my generation, the kind of the separation and the sense that everybody is really responsible for themselves and
Right,
nobody else
right.
is total. And
Yeah,
you
I
know
agree. Yeah,
and it's very hard to balance that sense that, okay, that arrangement that was taken as given in my mother's generation was very oppressive for the women,
right.
because it was always women's work, and
Mhm.
and we have escaped that.
Well, it's
But
an interesting thing too. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
we now
Leopold
have this
Polina.
kind of atomization and isolation.
Right, right. Agree.
So I think that's in a way one of the things that Stiegler's, what is caring, is really important, because I think we have reached a point where the old sort of structures that just caring for each other was a given have completely disappeared, or at least they have in the so-called advanced world.
I absolutely agree with you, and including distance too.
Mm,
This
mm,
and this has a very long history, as you know, for us that lived through it. The me generation, the
mm,
whole culture of narcissism. I'm not a big fan of Christopher Lash, but at least the
mm.
title was.
He had a point.
He had a point and a title that works in
Mm,
some ways, and all the way into the selfishness of the
mm,
Reagan years and going forward, how this has become more and more the careerism that went into
mm,
this. Not that people didn't have careers before, but the grounding, the backstabbing, all this that goes on in the name of careers now at this point. Yeah, and I think this is all contributing to basically a who cares attitude,
mm,
right, in
mm,
the culture at large that,
mm,
is not going to get us anywhere. It's really
mm.
and to put this in the language is a little bit closer to Stiegler, we live in cultures of neglect,
Yes.
really
Yeah.
neglect, right, in a way. And my family was very much the same. My grandmother had a stroke. The first thing my mother did was make my father build an extension to the house so that
Mm,
they could come live with us. They
yeah.
found her someone to take care of her during the day. We would take care of her at the night, et
Mm,
cetera, because of the stroke, and they lived with us,
yeah.
ever since, for a while, the grandparents. But my
Mm,
mother completely reversed that. Didn't want
mm.
anybody around.
No.
Just give her the piano, leave me alone, and I'll live out my day. I mean, people went to see her, when she
Mm,
got sick, but on the other hand, she was a social animal, but at the same
mm,
time, completely, for lack of a better term, self-sufficient and
yeah.
independent. I don't really like
Yeah.
that language, but you to
Mm,
use descriptive terms in literature. Yeah, I
Yeah.
hear and didn't want help from the children.
no.
Come visit me. I remember they sold the house, now I was only 20 years old. I mean, I moved out early, but 20 years old to go to a small apartment, right? An apartment that my cousin, an architect, thing. And it was like, we don't want our children here anymore.
No.
Leave me alone. So there was nothing welcoming anymore. I used to sleep in the library, the fold-out couch. I still have it, actually. The affection of sleeping in this little library that was created at this apartment in New Orleans. So yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, very interesting. How this reverses right in the next
Mm,
generation, as you say. Yeah, yeah,
mm,
yeah. David
I
has,
was,
yeah, please.
yeah, I was having some similar thoughts about family experiences and how this connects to Stiegler's work as well. Um, Three generations of women in my family, I think, speak to, in interesting ways, our framework to the possibility versus the actuality of care. I
Yeah,
think is really important, right? So like one of the things that we're trying to get at, I think, is the possibility of care is very rich in
right.
all of the best possible ways. The connection between generation and community and
mm,
all of the things. But the actuality of care
mm.
is very, very different. My mother happened to, so I'm also thinking in terms of the On Microfascism book and the notion of incapacitation and of like incapacitation as sort of a mechanism of kind of the war on women and how care,
Mm,
the actuality of care, can turn into an incapacitation. I'm thinking
mm,
about my mother and the way that my mother's days were filled with care. It was all care, top to
mm,
bottom. She had three children. She was a nurse, and she had an aging mother who lived to be 102 or 3, and who the last fully 20, 25 years of her life, she needed a great deal of care. My mother's mother, that grandmother, lived in a house by herself until she was more than 100 years old, smoked menthol cigarettes from the time she was 16 years old until the day that she died. I didn't have lung cancer, had a little bit of emphysema, but like whatever. but was also a shut-in. Like, she had no social life. She had her home that she got to stay in, and she was adamant about staying in her home. And everybody in her family, her brother, who was very wealthy, her brother I may have mentioned at other times in groups, he was Robert Applenalp, who invented aerosol and was one of Nixon's best friends. And so she could afford to be in her home by herself and have her preferences, but her preference was then to be completely by herself. She didn't drive. She was a homemaker whose husband divorced and just left the family when she was in her 30s, and she just kind of stayed in that house. And that was kind of it for the rest of her life. My sister is also a homemaker. Her husband's a C-level executive at a big tech firm. She has 2 kids who are in college now. She changed her home when my mother had ALS the last year and a half of her life, so that my mother could be cared for inside of her home. My mother spent 10 full years of her career as a nurse caring for a guy with ALS. So 8 hours, 10 hours a day, she was working with a guy who was completely incapacitated and lasted a very long time at a completely incapacitated state. So my mother's life, by the time that she got done feeding us at the end of the day, it was Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, the Law and Orders, as many of them as she wanted to watch, romance novels. It was very much like the feminist, the second wave feminist moment of like sociology, the moment of like trying to appreciate what women were doing when they were engaging with popular culture, was very much, that was my mother's evenings, right? Like, get away from me, I'm reading. And everybody gets away from her because mom has a romance novels, and we know that this was like part of the discipline. Like, that was her space. She like fought for that kind of space. So I find this really fascinating and enlightening, right? And like a really useful framework for me to help me understand the kind of density of care that was happening around me, and the way that lives were both like enlivened and like needs were met, but also incapacitated. My mother didn't have anything left at the end of the day. You know what I mean? It was, she just had to grab those moments. Finally, I just wanted to mention Stiegler, right? Yeah, the generational care thing is really interesting here. The paragraph about caring for the elderly, the beginning of his book on care for the generations, the whole beginning is his analysis of an advertisement, a print ad. And the print ad is, you got a nerdy, like not cool elderly couple in the background of a print ad, and a kid in the foreground of the print ad who's been, I forget exactly what it is, who's been like given a bad gift or something like that. And the headline is that the kids deserve better. And the suggestion, it's supposed to be funny, right? And the suggestion is that the kids deserve better than the sensibilities of their grandparents. And so his whole thing is that popular culture seeks to short circuit this relationship between generations.
Not only popular
like,
culture, consumer culture.
Exactly, yes.
That's what's really guarantees consumer culture. And I think Stiegler very much on to that, I think. I mean, of course, Marx would have that insight. Of course, we know that. Long other footnote to Das Kapital in commodity fetishism. But yes, there is no, just even the manifesto, the halo has been stripped from all family relations. The only nexus left is money. You remember this? This is a nice little paragraph.
This is all that solid melts into air. This is part of water, right?
1848, right?
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I just
finish. That was my last thing.
I mean, my mother just passed last year at 103 and lived by herself.
Well, you're all gonna outlive me. I mean, I'm not.
I know it's. Yeah. And it was the issue in terms of how she would be cared for. She was fiercely independent, and it was only like the last, basically about 3 years, that we ended up having people come in, and this is, we talk about the professionalization of it's taken place in terms of care, but this is in Napa, California. This is a town that I grew up in, and there are a community of immigrants from Fuji who in the Bay Area have basically taken on, it's almost like it's a particular group of people that have immigrated in the United States in the West Coast who basically perform care service.
Right.
And it's fascinating the way in which I have two brothers. One lived Palo Alto, the other one lived in Napa. And I lived on the West Coast. Distance, prevented me from really kind of participating, but I always had a hand. We would visit her twice a year. But the last 3 years, this woman, Fuji woman, ended up taking care of her. And rather than the professionalization, they became friends. It was much more of in a way, a kind of substitute family. And it was fascinating the way in which it developed. But 103, I'm not sure I want to live that long.
Not with the Trumpocene. It's geared towards war on the elderly too.
Yeah.
Fortunately. Yeah. So we'll see. Yeah, knowing Stanley very well, and after his stroke, Phil and David were here when that was happening. He had a caretaker, actually a Russian woman, who basically fell in love with him. She stayed in, et cetera, et cetera. I used to joke with Stanley, she added 2 or 3 years to your life. He lasted 6 years after the stroke, right? And I still try to get in touch with her, et cetera, but very disturbed about missing Stanley and knowing him. And there was this kind of fusion that Stanley never got from the professional people that would come over to show him how to do occupational therapy things, around the kitchen, how to use the bathroom the right way, and all this kind of stuff. Nonsense to me, in the sense that any human being is going to figure this out. So I hear you here in terms of this kind of deep connection. Did you meet Katie, David, ever? I think you saw. She used to bring him in the wheelchair to classes sometimes.
Yep, once or twice for reading groups at his apartment and at the People's Forum. I just saw her as his caretaker. Yeah.
I kept telling her, you're getting a real education here. Now you know all about the Grundrisse. I used to joke with her when she was from Georgia. I said, "How's Joe Stalin today?" "We hate Stalin." She goes, so it was fun. That kind of moment. But I saw that. Yeah. My mother was like Patrick, was fiercely independent too. I don't want anybody coming over to my table, like Joni Mitchell. I'm just going to blow the candle out. Please leave me alone. But, during the time when they're most vulnerable, you can see still the strategy, the structure of this interdependency is really needed. Yeah. And this is very important. And David, I like the fact that you go to generational care. His big thing, in a sense, as a practice, was to how do you do generational transmission? And obviously something was really missing after, the Beryl's mother's generation, probably Patrick's, mine, et cetera, into the next generation, which were encouraged to be totally independent, stay away, just call mom, once a year, et cetera, see how she's doing, this kind of thing. So the question is, was this part of the loss of something, the transition, or what the natives like to talk about, the ancestral tradition, or the respect for the elders in the Asian philosophies that we've really lost in many ways, right? Yeah, many ways. As Hugh Kenner said one time in class when many years ago, Hugh Kenner was a professor of literature who wrote The Pound. I think I told you the story. He would go visit Ezra Pound as an old man when he was at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, and Pound would sit on the bench, visitation 1 hour or something. They would throw peanuts to the pigeons, and Pound would talk about poetry. And Kenner said, in class, he said, "Look, I learned more in those sessions than I did in 25 years of schooling." Right? In a sense. And this was a real respect. It's not only because Ezra Pound was one of the greatest poets ever. I just got the count. I had a great find this weekend. I got a first edition of the New Directions, edition hardbound of the cantos.
Oh, wow.
Hard cantos, I got it. Yeah. And I picked it up in a used bookstore. He wanted 100. I got him down to 50. Yeah. Anyway, I got the dust jacket and everything. Yeah. So anyway, but I mean, just think about this. Do you really have moments like this? I mean, in a sense, yeah, yeah. We don't have them in many ways.
No,
Yeah, we
no.
don't have them anymore. And that's a real problem in terms of what Stiegler will call, the tertiary retention, right? Anonymous. Anonymous is built generationally. Now, hyponemesis is easy, the externalization of memory
Sure.
into the YouTubes, into the data storage area. But
Mm.
the anonymic is part of the storytelling, the communication, all of these things that really go on. The dialogical in Bakhtin's sense, a very rich concept, right? Going forward. So again, I think these are very critical concepts and critical means that we really have to do, in a sense. I mean, I keep emphasizing to my students, unless you learn how to read, you're going to just die of complete boredom. I tell them this, and then I talk to them about the sleepwalkers in the novel, and I go around the room snapping my fingers in front of them. Yeah, wake up, you're sleepwalking. Yeah, Leslie, please. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I was just thinking, we've been talking about family,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
sometimes communication between the generations is easier when it's not a direct relation. And that's where I've had some really wonderful moments with people, with my elders, for example, and even with younger people who I'm not directly related to. And then the stories come out and it's very rich. So it's community now we're talking about. It goes way beyond just break out of the family and all of that trauma, etc., and able to speak freely. The one-on-one is so important, deniable culpability or whatever it is.
Mhm.
So it's much bigger even than what we've started talking about. It's fascinating.
There's a certain independence. I mean, I know this in my own life history that is really critical to being able to develop your sense of self. And this is I mean, to Leslie's point, it's not so much the parents. The parents are obviously very influential, but it's once you break free of the parents and you're able to explore the world and that intergenerational thing. There's a biography that Andre Gortz wrote about his history. And one of the points he makes in that biography is his independence in terms of developing a sense of self. And I think I mean, I'm kind of being a devil's advocate because the intergenerational connection is there, but it's not direct. It needs to branch out from your parents. My mother, fiercely religious. My father, an agnostic of some sort, who knows. And in the engineering area, my mother a housewife, etc. And in that religious dimension, yeah, it shaped me, it formed me, but also there is this break that takes place. And that's the critical. I think that's a very critical thing in terms of a development of a sense of self.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I mean, two things to that. One, a quote from Hegel. Um, uh, Children and grandparents have one enemy in common, parents.
Yes.
I think this is very revealing to what you said about the intergeneration. Hegel did say that. I think it's
Yeah.
in the Waste book. I'll try to remember. That always stuck with me in a way that
Yeah.
progression. And those of you that don't know Andre Gortz, I guess some of you do, of course. Andre Gortz was changed his name from Gerhard Horch, came from a very wealthy German family, went to Paris, was a philosopher. His most famous book was Farewell to the Working Class,
Yeah.
which was
Great
his
book.
thing. But he was part of the Sartrean circle, one of the major figures there. His later books are very interesting to read alongside Stiegler's critique for a new critique of political economy, the critique of economic reason. A very, very solid book, one of his later books, but very, very good. And as Patrick said, his autobiography, right? It's
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. And anyway, a major thinker, forgotten pretty much in labor studies, especially because of Farewell to the working class was not a great title during the period. He didn't mean it that way, but it yeah, came out. Yeah, yeah. And David, one of Stanley's favorite people that he actually had the pleasure of meeting in Paris. He met the three people Stanley always talked about from the days in Paris. You have the book. Yeah, good. Okay, so he talked about
I have it because Stanley mentioned Andre Gortz. So
okay, okay, okay.
reading a bunch of his work.
Jean-Marie Vincent, who wrote on abstract and concrete labor in Marx, right? He met him, and he always talked about how he liked to put the mustard in the salad.
He wrote the introduction to the translation. Stanley did, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he did maybe to one of
Yeah.
yeah. And he wrote this. They wrote the introduction to Paul Willis's Learning to Labor, which is a great book too on labor studies. Truly great book about the English working class. And then Stanley, the other person was Henri Lefebvre, who he was enamored of, that he loved, right? And the third was Andre Gortz, who he actually, met while in Paris. Stanley's reputation in Paris was solidified. He went there in '76 to teach, right, at the École Haute Études I think in sociology, right? And he was there visiting. And he predicted that Jimmy Carter would win the presidential election, and all the French are laughing at him. But he managed to stay long enough when Carter got elected in November of 1976. So Stanley became a kind of local hero or legend in terms of prognostications. When he went back in '84, the different kind of royal carpet was set out, during that period. And Bill DeFazio, those of you that knew a little bit of Bill's work on longshoremen and ordinary poverty, was kind of the caretaker to Nona, the daughter, right? Because she was a little tall, and he went to Paris with Stanley, and he took care of Nona during the day. It's kind of interesting in terms of the maternal moment where Stanley was teaching all the time. Anyway, so yeah, kind of interesting in that regard. But yeah, Gortz was a great figure and a book worth studying, the book on economic reasoning, as well as Farewell to the Working Class. Yeah, going on. So yeah, this is good. This is good that Eva Kittay. By the way, there's a thing I can show you parts of it if you'd like on YouTube of her talking about autism and her daughter. Are you interested in this? I mean, I could play it tonight, and then we can pick up next week, and watch your emails. Weather permitting, I want to be in Montreal by next Tuesday, but if the weather's bad, I might have to leave on Tuesday. So just check the emails. I'll make it up the following Tuesday. So yeah, let me just see if I can find this thing here. Hold on 1 second. See if I have it up still. Yeah, I have it. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody see? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think this is the interview. Let me just see if there's an interview here. Yeah, here it is. Yeah.
And talk.
This is Eva Kittay. Yeah, beautiful house, huh?
What should martyrdom?
Let me go back. Yeah.
Cross off your holiday.
Oops, sorry about that. Consumer culture.
Can't escape it.
Welcome to Autism Confidential. My name is Amy Lutz. I'm the Vice President of NCSA, and I'm here today with Eva Kittay. She is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at Stony Brook University. Her primary interests include feminist philosophy, ethics, social and political theory, and the application of these disciplines to disability studies. And she's written several books, including this one, Learning from My Daughter, that we'll be talking about today a little bit. And she's also edited several anthologies. And I just have to have one fangirl moment here and say that Eva has been a tremendous inspiration to me. Before I went back to graduate school. Some of you may know that I'm about to get my doctorate this May in the history of medicine. And I decided to go back to school after reading Eva's books about and seeing how amazingly she combines scholarship with advocacy and her personal experience as the mom of an intellectually disabled daughter. So Eva, thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you. I'm very flattered that you were that inspired to go back to get your doctorate. That's fabulous.
Yeah. Yes, you did inspire me. So you are not the parent of an autistic child, so we should start off with that because this is, after all, an NCSA podcast. But can you tell us about your daughter?
Yes, no, my daughter is not autistic. We've just learned in 2-3 years ago that she has Pura syndrome, which is a syndrome that was just discovered at 2014. About 400 people, 405, moving up all the time, have been diagnosed with it. So it's a mutation on the Pura gene, and the Pura gene turns out to be an incredibly important one. It produces Pura alpha protein, which is very important in brain functioning. And we realized pretty early on that she wasn't developing properly. She wasn't picking up her head. She wasn't rolling. She wasn't doing the sorts of things that babies do, though it took me a while to realize that, being a young mom. But, and we didn't really try to get a diagnosis. We didn't really care about a diagnosis because Sasha was just Sasha. And she is a beautiful, now 52-year-old woman. She's bright and lively, and when she's feeling well, that is to say. And she has her loves. She loves love. She loves music. Music is, I like to say music is her life. She could listen to music all the time. She particularly likes classical music, which is what she's been hearing at our house most of her life. She can't do anything for herself. She is totally dependent. She can't feed herself. She can't toilet herself, though she has some level of continence. She doesn't walk. She used to walk. She now walks when she's well enough with a walker. She has seizures, epilepsy, and those have been particularly troublesome. And they can they knock her for a loop. And I'm not sure. She loves food. She's a real gourmet. And though now she has to only eat pureed food, but we've kept her off the tube. So that's my daughter, and she is. I have a son as well, who is wonderful, and grandchildren who love her, and she loves them. So she is, very integrated into our family. At the age of 37, she was living at home with us the entire time. We always had help because she can't do anything for herself. So she needs 24/7 care. When the person who was helping us with her for 25 years finally retired, we we found the Center for Discovery where she now lives. And I was very reticent to let her go out of our home. It became pretty clear from the beginning that she was really happy to be there. And what we find now is that she's very happy to come home on weekends with us. At the same time, after 2 days with mom and dad, she is ready to go back.
That's great.
That's about as much as I can think offhand to tell you. But
So a lot of us, the parents of autistic kids, know what it's like to have our professional lives derailed by a diagnosis and the labor that follows. You're a philosopher. What was the focus of your work before Sasha was born, and how did her life with you inform your scholarship subsequent to that?
I went into philosophy in part to distract me from the very difficult fact of her extreme disability. So I was doing pretty abstract work. I was working in the philosophy of language. I wrote a book on metaphor, which is still in print. So I had sort of bifurcated the two parts of my life. Fortunately, I have a very helpful husband who you just years. And we were able to get help for her, very good help for her. Then at a certain point, I had there was a conference on philosophy and disability and mental retardation and disability. And I thought, wow. So I went to that conference and I was rather shocked at how little people understood about intellectual disability, about significant intellectual disability. I'm not sure what they were working off, but they weren't working off the kind of lived experience I had. And so I decided at some point that I would write about it. And I finally got around to it when I got some invitations. One was a bioethics involving the question of prenatal testing. And the other was an invitation from Sara Ruddick, who was a wonderful was a wonderful philosopher who wrote about mothering and care. And she wrote a really wonderful book called Maternal Thinking, rather. But her paradigm, of course, was the normal child. So she wanted to write a book. I mean, she was accused of that, she's writing from her middle class white background. And knowing me, she also realized she was writing a very ableist background. So she did a collection of essays of mothers who come from very different kinds of circumstances than her own. So she asked me to contribute to that book. And that essay was actually the breakthrough essay where I really poured onto the page so much of what I have been thinking about all these years. And the bioethics contribution was a very difficult one because I was arguing that prenatal testing and selective abortion, these were decisions that really had to be left to the mother or to the expectant parent. It was difficult because, having a child like this, I was expected to say, no, prenatal testing is terrible. And it means that, you think my child's life isn't worthwhile. And I clearly didn't think my child's life wasn't worthwhile. I thought, worthwhile lives I know. But it was the actual amount of time and energy, resources that it took to give her a good life that made me hesitant about thinking about having a child with another disability. Since then, I have to say, I have met parents with more than one child with a significant disability. And I've been astounded at how well they manage. And from there, I realized that I could too. But, at the time, it didn't seem like it was a possibility. So I had considered, if I had gotten pregnant again, that I would test. So that was a first time I had really interacted with people within the disability community, which was both difficult and very enlightening and very helpful in many ways, even though we never came to an agreement.
Can you say more about that interaction that you had with them?
Yeah. Well, I should say that, first of all, it was very difficult because at this point in my life, I had really settled into Sasha's disability. Sasha was wonderful just as she was. I wasn't interested in trying to change her, make her into a so-called normal child. So what being involved in this discussion did was dredge up for me, those early feelings that were so difficult. As I tried to make clear when I talk to people there that there was, my position was in no way related to what the disability community calls the expressivist objection to prenatal testing or selective abortion. Which
Can you just say what that is?
To say that, yes. Which was that it expresses the view that a life with a disability is not worth living. And that was absolutely not what I thought. So I would try to get through to folks who really couldn't see that it was really the extra, well, I'll say difficulty. I mean, it is difficult. It's difficult to have a child who cannot walk, cannot talk, cannot feed themselves, cannot tell you when they're sick, which is one of the worst things about Sasha's disability. She can't tell us when she's not feeling well, and we have to guess, We have to guess where she hurts, what hurts. I mean, these things are, plus, of course, there's the stigma, walking out with the child and such. But aside from that, it's just a managing problem. I mean, it's just a lot of difficulty in trying to think through how to manage all these things so that she can have a worthwhile life, you know.
That's an incredible amount of labor.
Yes, it's And I remember one wonderful, amazing disability scholar. I don't know if I should name her name, a feminist disability scholar who looked at me and said, "You just want us to think you're a martyr."
Yeah.
And I said, no. She said, "It's no more difficult to raise a child with a disability than without a disability." No, this was a woman who did not have children of her own. Yeah. She didn't even know what it was to raise a child without a disability. But she said, for her parents, it was no more difficult. Well, maybe her parents didn't want to communicate to her the extra challenges. And there are extra challenges because everything is set up for the normal kid, for the healthy kid, everything's set up for you. But not everything is set up when you have a child like mine, we have to put all the infrastructure in place. We have to put all the scaffolding in place, for her life to be a good life.
I do think the cognitive impairment adds another layer of difficulty on top of that. Someone who just has a physical impairment can communicate, like you said, can describe what they need, what they want to do. There are so fewer obstacles to them, living the life that they want, or even knowing what kind of life they want to live. But when you have a profound cognitive impairment, all of these things get so much more complicated.
Yes, and you have to do you have to pay a lot of attention. You have to pay a lot of attention to trying to understand what they're feeling at the time. Knowing what they dislike, what makes them unhappy, knowing if they're feeling ill, trying to suss out what gives them joy and what gives them pleasure and what things to continue on. And these things all have to be sussed out in a way that, they have to be in with all children to some extent, to a great deal, to a large extent, because that's what caregiving is. Caregiving involves all this real attention. And it is precisely because of living with someone who needed that kind of care, that kind of intensive care throughout her life, that I became very interested in. That I became particularly interested in what sort of developed into a feminist ethic of care. The work of Carol Gilligan is very, very significant to me. It was significant to me for several reasons. First of all, I recognized in my mother care, the person who lived with an ethic of care. And I recognized in my father someone who lived by an ethic of justice. And I no longer try to keep those two things apart. I think they need to be brought together. But there are different ways of looking at moral life. And so that was the first thing that struck me about reading Gilligan. But the other thing that struck me about Gilligan was the whole idea that one needed to, what I wanted to work out really was what does an ethic of care really involve? And having lived with, not being able to do this all by myself, and I don't think any mother or parent should think that they can take care of a child with significant disabilities on their own. It's too much, and that comes back to bite you. when you try to do it all on your own. But because I really had a commitment to myself as someone who wanted a life outside of the domestic sphere. And because of Sasha's needs, we always had someone who helped with Sasha. My husband helped a lot, but that wasn't enough. So I was also very interested in the skills of caregiving and the condition of people who give care, the situation, their situation, and the importance of, as I say, other people have said, caring for the caregiver, how that's a vital importance in terms of having the person you care for be well cared for, as well as the fact that they deserve care, like we all deserve care when we need care. And that care is just fundamental to human existence. So you asked me how I combined my personal life and my professional life. I was always interested in ethics, but the ethics that I was reading was not addressing these kinds of questions. And I thought eventually that I had a perspective on a huge part of ethical life that most people have in a fleeting way. So that, they're taking care of someone when they're sick for a while. So they understand that. But it comes and it goes, and you forget it. You raise a child that's capable of, that grows into be a capable person on their own. First few years are like intense caregiving. And then you forget about that kind of intense caregiving. So you're always a mother even when you have an adult child, but that kind of intense caregiving is no longer with you. And so what I had was a certain advantage. I had the fact and the experience of that kind of intense caregiving in front of me all the time, all through my life. And that was a particular vantage point that I thought was so important to bring to the philosophical literature. And realizing, of course, that care isn't just a small part of life. Care is central. It's central. Dependence, our human dependence that we're born with, that we return to in times of sickness, in times when we're much older. That is just part of the human condition. And of course, our interdependence as well. But I stress dependence because it is an asymmetrical relationship. Most ethical theories are based on symmetrical relationships. And it's also really important to think about those asymmetrical relationships, asymmetrical power, asymmetrical capacities, asymmetrical social positions, and so on. So the writing about disability in the context of the bioethical workshop at Hastings and writing about it in terms of mothering, that propelled me into it. But there was so much to do, Still so much to do in terms of really trying to understand what caregiving means, what it means as an ethical notion, and trying to impress on us all the universality of the importance of care as an ethical concept.
So when people say care ethics today, what does that look like? What does that mean?
Well, so there's been quite a number of feminist philosophers, but not only philosophers, care theorists in other areas, in political science, anthropology, who have been writing about care. And from a philosopher's standpoint, the ethic of care gives us a different conception of who the human being is. But the human being isn't an isolated, independent self. That the self is always a self that is in relation to others. Most ethical theories just begin with the atomistic self and then move to the social connections. And in ethics of care, you start with a self that's already in connection to others. It gives us a different conception of how you think through an ethical problem. Rather than using pure deductive reasoning from a principle down to particulars, you're engaged in, you engage the emotional and empathetic responses. And these are not distractions from, but they are necessary to figuring out what the right practice is in the caring situation. You are thinking about particulars. The practice of care involves a relation to a particular person with particular needs at that particular time in that particular place. This is actually a bit Aristotelian, to tell you the truth, but Aristotle has a lot to say that's valuable, but a lot to say that's not valuable. But it's the particularity of the situation that you focus on when you're when you're in a caring situation and you're trying to make decisions about what the right thing to do is. Ethical theories in general, most ethical theories look at being able to universalize. I think I can do something. Well, do you think everyone can do that? In care, I think I can do that because of the particularity of the situation. The other thing that I and some other people want to bring in is that care ethics is not only about a dyadic relationship between a carer and a cared for, because a carer and a cared for are always in a larger, nested in a larger context, in a larger situation. So you can only care for your child, let's say it's your child that you're talking about, if you have the resources to do that properly. Now, when you're totally engaged in taking care of your child, you're really hampered in trying to acquire resources, right? You need another.
Did you off the sound? Did you?
Yeah, I think we lost Michael.
Well,
I sent a note in the chat, but I don't think he's seen it. That's too bad. That was good. I enjoyed it. Got a lot out of it.
you can go on YouTube and watch it on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. We're about halfway, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, there he's back.
I'm back. I'm sorry. I had to go in the back for a second. You can continue with this and we can discuss a little bit of a project if you'd like. You know, it's only about
Their infrastructure look like?
10 more minutes. If you want to pick
Well,
up, it's Eva Kittay
that.
interview with autism, autism, and ethics of care. So I'll stop it here. I thought you'd get a good sense of what she's doing. Yeah. In this, sorry, I'm going to go back to it here. Just look at this. Yeah.
Our society.
Yeah. So you get an idea of who she is and what she's actually up to here based on her own lived experience, you know, coming out of a philosophical tradition of ethics, but how she takes that on in a very different way. And I like, personally, I like the idea of the gift of care, you know, the giving as a gift of care, you know, something that we should really think about as well, right? And care, as Heidegger says, I mean, you know, you can argue with what his notion of care of Zorga is as both a calling and a shaping and all these levels that he goes through in being and time. But one thing he does say, you know, care as being, right? Care is essential to life in so many ways. And this ultimately is something, again, that we no longer have, you know, Caroline, you know, ecological horizons, how little care there is for this. You know, capitalism has no care, right, for its inhabitants, etc., which is part of the revolutionary impetus to get rid of it, right, in many ways, to become human again. Again, this issue of that went on in the Soviet Union, that human beings, at least experimented in terms of innate capacity or capacities of all lives are worth living, right? You know, not just the privileged, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot to work with here. I mean, I don't know your feel. I mean, I'm sorry to, you know, do 30 minutes of Eva Kittay talking about it, but I think it's interesting to see the person behind the work a little bit, you know, in a sense.
Yeah, I have two thoughts about this. Yeah, sure. I think Rawls is probably the pivotal person, a foil for her.
Yes.
In terms of the way in which this is defined, you know, and Rawls basically a kind of bastardized version of Kant, but there's a different notion in Hegel of ethical life, which brings in. The other thing is I went through the book. Not that carefully, but somewhat. Freud is missing.
Yes, completely.
And
very good point. I was going to get to that, but you anticipated it. Yeah.
And the notion of transference.
Yes,
which
exactly.
I think is
Very good point.
pivotal. I mean, maybe not the way in which Freud exactly understood it, like
Right.
later on, the notions of transference and countertransference, um, and that, I mean, which brings in that affective level in terms of communication that goes on, that level of intersubjectivity at the level of the body.
Right.
And but she's trying to get at that. And I think this is yet another symptom of the kind of deficiency of American philosophy, that in a sense it has to reinvent what the continental tradition, I'm sorry, this is my
No, it's okay.
and I think you
I'm
share
with
it.
you in this.
It's
I'm just fine. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's a deficiency of American philosophy, that she
Right.
isn't able to draw upon that part of the tradition. And but anyway,
you raised something very interesting here. I'm not the biggest fan of hers, but I think that Catherine Malibu's her best book is on the ontology of the accident that comes out of the continental tradition, which problematizes it more, from the continental philosophical tradition's point of view, right? That there is something that can be ontologized here as accidental. And she knows Freud and current, moments in neurology. In fact, Stiegler's first wife is Catherine.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, no, very very good points. I mean, that's the first thing that struck me. None of the psychoanalytic tradition is here. I mean, one thing that was always missing. I mean, as you all know, I really love the book Anti-Oedipus. I think it's a great stimulus and a very interesting moment. Probably go back to it if we do the psychiatry, anti-psychiatry moments. But one thing it does miss is a structural foundation of care. It's very symptomatic in what it does. It proposes schizoid analysis, but ultimately it lacks care. One of the things that it's missing. And this is something that's kind of preoccupied me theoretically, why Deleuze and Guattari never really went there, ultimately, into, a culture of care, or, care as an absolutely necessary, a category in the ethics of treatment. Lacan had it, in the ethics of psychoanalysis, even though he doesn't just use the kind of language per se, but you see it all over the ethics of psychoanalysis, and of course his reading of Antigone. But yeah, great points. We can go on with this for forever, as you know, right? But I hear you about the limitations of American ethical theory, right? In the sense how it's translated, etc., and what kind of occurred in all of this. Yes, I agree. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, over the years. I don't know, Beryl, you can fill us in. Did Sara Ruddick have a category, anything borrowed from psychoanalysis? It was
I don't
more,
know, Michael.
okay.
I'm not familiar with her.
Oh, with Ruddick, you're not familiar with Ruddick?
Or if I was, I've
Oh,
forgotten.
okay. I see. I got you. Okay. I hear you. Okay. No problem. I haven't looked at Sarah Ruddick stuff in a very long time.
Long
I
time.
remember the moment of Gilligan and Ruddick
Yeah.
in the States, in the Anglo world. But I'm with, I mean, look, I'm on the same page with Patrick here, because I also come out of that similar tradition, if you will. The analytical continental divide in some ways is totally phony. It should be called Anglo-American versus European, in many ways. But this is what's going on, because analytic also is continental, begins with Frege, very good book by Dummett on the origin of analytical philosophy. Yeah, wrote a very good book beginning with Gottlieb Frege. So yeah, no, this is good though. I don't know if you liked it, but I thought she has very interesting things to say about her lived experience and how she got to where she was going, and also the question of the moving beyond the dyad. Right? I thought that was interesting as well. The dyadic thinking that is going on all the time. And, and also the tendency so much in psychoanalysis sometimes in a reductive way, to only think about how long can you talk about your mother, right? Right. how long is this going to go on? Yeah, right. In a sense, I'm sorry. But anyway, yeah, again, yeah. So, yeah, another aspect. But anyway, we can. I mean, I think it's a good introduction to a different part of the theorizing about what is care, what is called caring, and then how it works practically in many ways. I thought what's interesting, and you're right, Patrick, the foil here is obviously Rawls, right? The theory of justice. And what she's trying to do, what the project is obviously to bring together an ethics of care, right? In terms of, a moral philosophy and an ethics of justice. She's trying to really develop the two together, I think, in a way. So we can see if this is somewhat successful. So yeah. Anyway, I mean, I'm looking forward. Bruno's really taken by this. So if he shows up next week, and please check, I'll send out an email depending on weather conditions. But um, uh, but he's really into this kind of thing, especially because he had for lack of a better term, uh, disabled, if you will, brother, that they took care of for a long time. So he has a personal relation there. Yeah, yeah. In many ways. So anyway, I don't. Yeah. So maybe he can offer some insight into this as well in terms of care. So yeah, anything else? I mean, maybe we can leave it at there tonight if you want. I know it's 9:15. You guys enjoyed the Miguel presentation last week? Yeah,
Very much.
it was good. I will share the paper once I'm allowed to. I need Miguel's approval to share the paper. I think it's still a work in progress. I think he's a little bit, and he doesn't have the publisher yet because it's going into a book we've been discussing, the two of us, for a long time. But yeah, thank you very much for coming. I thought it was an excellent presentation and very good questions. And didn't mean to put you on the spot, Beryl. Miguel was there, but he was happy to have met you in person in
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No, I really like and admire him.
Right.
And I wanted to get a copy. I thought I might write to him and ask him to send my son a copy of the paper.
Well, why don't you do that? Because if I ask, he's going to think I'm sending it to the whole world, right? I mean, yeah, whatever. Yeah.
And then you can share it with
academic.
us.
And I can
I'm
share
never
it with
this
my
way.
son.
I'm never this way. I don't. Ideas are public. They're not really private to me. So I don't really have that private hoarding aspect in my personality. But most people in the academic world do. So it can be a problem.
Goes with ambition, I think, Michael.
I guess so. So. You might be right about that. I like what T.S. Eliot said about Paul Valery. He was so smart, he had no end.
Yes.
I always like that of T.S. Eliot
Yes.
about the French poet and mathematician Paul Valery. He was
Yeah.
so smart, he had no ambition. I understand, though. Yeah.
Yes.
Marx never wrote for publication. I mean, Marx wrote for revolution. Anyway, yeah, in some ways. Nietzsche wasn't in the university, after a certain time, yeah. So who knows? Yeah. But yeah, there's this attitude in academia, someone's going to steal an idea.
Yeah.
Of course, it's all been said before. It's the new style that counts.
Exactly.
At this point. And at this point, anybody talks about originality, you better be a high-powered mathematician because that's the only place originality is really, going on at this point to keep up with the algorithmic governmentality, the equations, everything that I wish we had. I mean, I know I've said this many times. I really wish we had radical mathematicians, that tradition back that, somehow there was a light in that with Struick and other people in the United States. I don't know about Europe. Simone Weil's brother, Andre Weil, was a member of the Bourbaki group, that special group that ended up at Princeton. and he ended up at Princeton. Andre Weil, Simone Weil died very early in her life, but yeah, there were these mathematicians that really wanted to bring, again, mathematics sort of down to earth in a certain way and show how it could be taught in a very radical way and in a historical way. So, like I told you, my Christmas present to myself is Marx's mathematical manuscript. I got the pound, that's my pre-Christmas, and so I'm going to have one on the right and one on the left. The poet, Marx's real ambition was to become a poet. He used to write pretty bad poetry, but anyway, Pound did not write bad poetry. But the ABC of money leaves a lot to be desired if you've ever read the ABC of money, of economy. I'm sorry. ABC of reading is great, but the ABC of money, yeah. So anyway, all right. So good. Okay. So I hope next week, and we'll pick this up. I'll send out. I think Bruno wanted to talk about chapter 6. Yeah, in a way.
Okay.
So
Good.
I'll bring him, and we can continue with this. But Patrick, I want to agree with you, and that's another thing about my good friend Bruno Gulli. He doesn't have much depth in terms of psychoanalysis, right? Not that he's not thinking, and he comes out of the continental tradition, more Heidegger and of course Marx, but yeah, but not very little psychoanalysis. But I think you're absolutely right. The whole notion of transference and counter-transference is a relational element that could have really been brought in here in a very imaginative way. Yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, good. Okay. Well,
Okay.
thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Michael.
we see
Thank you.
some of us Friday, Monday, and Tuesday. Boy,
Yes.
a new Zoom club here at work.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. See you soon. Be well. Stay well
care.
in the cold, at least in the yeah. Bye.